Hey now, we are getting over, and I am the Silver King, Adam Silverstein, here to lead you through these hard times. With episode 626 of your favorite professional wrestling podcast. That's right, Getting Over is back once again, and it is Thursday, so you know exactly what that means. We are here to break down everything that happened over the last week across NXT and AEW. For NXT, it was night 2 of the Great American Bash special television event. AEW, of course, still building toward the All in London pay-per-view. We have an absolute ton to get to on today's show, and the Silver King is straight up exhausted taping this after the conclusion of that United States-Serbia Olympic basketball game that was totally wild. It has been a long day, so allow me off the top to remind you that the Getting Over Wrestling podcast
is all about Defy.
So please head on over to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating on Apple. Take a little extra time. Leave a 5-star written review. If you do, we will read it live right here on the show. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube at Getting Overcast and follow us on Twitter at Getting Overcast for episode drops, news analysis, highlights, all that good stuff. You can also send in questions and comments for the show that we will do our best to read on the air, but I promise we will read all of them. Please also remember,
I happen to love the number 5.
and I hope you do as well, because for $5 a month or $50 for the entire year, you can become an official Getting Overhead. Just visit buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Sign up. You will get bonus audio, the fastest 5 minutes in professional wrestling, instant reactions to the major shows, and exclusive news posts on Friday. Again, that is buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Now, I was originally going to start today's show with somewhat of a news update covering some decent big ticket items across NXT and AEW. But like I said, it's been a chaotic day. I just don't have the time to do it. We'll discuss some of them this coming Tuesday on our WWE episode. We'll also deliver plenty of news in that post on buymeacoffee.com/gettingover that does involve NXT and AEW, the news I am referring to. And then next week, back in this same spot, we will cover everything else that hasn't been touched on, at least from an audio perspective. One note I will share just right here: NXT, the first 2 episodes on the CW, will not take place in the WWE Performance Center. NXT is going on the road. The first show in Chicago with CM Punk, the second show in St. Louis with Randy Orton. Like I said, I would spend a lot more time talking about it. I just don't have it today, but that is pretty monumental. It also sucks for the Silver King, because I was thinking about like spending a week in Orlando and going to both of those events, maybe trying to interview some NXT and WWE talent. Turns out they're not even going to be there for those shows. But it is pretty cool. NXT in Chicago and St. Louis, those should be pretty solid crowds. All right, with that, let's get into our full breakdowns. We will tackle NXT first and AEW second. There are timestamps in the episode description. So as always, if you want to skip around, you have that opportunity, but I hope you listen to the entire show. So for NXT, it was night 2 of the Great American Bash, the last week on Sci-Fi. They will be back on USA Network this coming Tuesday. We had Trick Williams against Pete Dunne. This kicked off the show. Started technical until they chopped the ever-loving shit out of one another. Trick then caught Pete flying backwards off the ropes with a mid-air neckbreaker. Much later, he caught him on the ropes for an avalanche flapjack and added Trouble in Paradise. Dunne started stomping his head in, but he twice refused to quit. Trick did, and then he kipped up. Dunne ripped down a turnbuckle pad while being beaten in the corner. Then he dodged Williams into it. His knee hit the exposed turnbuckle, and Dunne landed bitter end for the win in 13 minutes. Super hard-hitting match. It ultimately delivered. You could tell Dunne was working hard with Williams here, like from a teaching standpoint. I said it last week. Trick soared so high so fast, he needed to get knocked down a peg. This was exactly what I hoped would happen. It was an excused loss, but still mostly clean for Dunne. Given a turnbuckle to the knee, only makes so much impact. And there's no shame in Trick losing to a guy of this caliber. He's, I think, the second longest reigning NXT UK champion of all time, over a year. The match probably over-delivered to expectation. There were some high-impact spots. Dunne badly needed the win now that he's wrestling singles for the foreseeable future. This was a quality opener. I went 3.75 stars B+. Dunne later put over Williams' talent, saying he's got a ton of potential, but he's not as ready as Dunne to challenge for the NXT title. Trick attacked as they got separated by a half dozen officials. And look, running it back immediately with Williams beating Dunne, it would kind of reverse the benefits of putting Pete over initially, everything that I just told you. I'm not sure why Trick can't take the L and move on, but that really would have been the best case scenario here. Ethan Page was speaking to a trainer about particular types of ice baths when Nathan Frazier came in, sarcastically wishing him luck. Page took offense and they went back and forth talking shit, with the former pointing out Axiom was not even there alongside Frazier. Axiom showed up later, saying he was giving Frazier his space, so they went off to strategize for their match. And I'll just tell you straight up, coming out of this segment, I thought, well, clearly the tag team champions are losing their titles, and Frazier's going to challenge Page. Like, that was the thought I had coming out of this. So let's move into those two title matches. NXT Championship on the line, Page against Oro Mensah. Metaphor was ringside. Mensah hit a sonic boom style kick, tope suicida, and a spin kick. Page went out to the set, dropping Oro into a picnic table. Then he hit Ego's Edge into it and a DDT in the ring for a false finish. Mensah came back with his spinning heel kick, but Page's foot was under the rope. Oro tripped doing a springboard. Luckily, it was a spot he was supposed to miss anyway. Page came back with a boot and Ego's Edge to retain the title. This certainly did not exceed expectations. I wouldn't even say it met them. Mensah has talent, but this was really not his best showing by any means. If this had been like a make or break match for him, I'd be concerned. But it was all one note, never hit a fourth gear, despite the fact that it did get plenty of time, I think at 13, 14 minutes, something like that. Tag Team Championship was the main event. Frazier and Axiom defending against MSK. Backstage before the match, Zach Wentz talked about how it had been nearly 900 days since they got stripped of the titles, with Wes Lee adding that he has had some dark days since then without his brothers, and it was time for them to make a moment. Wentz did like 25 Bronco Buster thrusts until Lee basically forced him to stop it. It was a really dumb spot. For Axiom, hit a tope con hero and springboard moonsault outside. Wentz caught Frazier on a springboard moonsault with a perfect suplex. The champions hit the Spanish Fly, Phoenix Splash combo nearly halfway into the ring. It was actually pretty impressive for a broken fall. Axiom accidentally superkicked Frazier, only to get tagged with the same from Wes Lee. Wentz then hit a tornado-style cutter off the ropes for a false finish. MSK landed the push moonsault. That was a broken fall. Frazier landed the superplex into a vertical suplex with a short-range golden ratio for a false finish, and then Axiom hit golden ratio clean for the 1-2-3 to retain the titles in 11 minutes. They all dapped up after the bell, and the Rascals lifted Lee off the canvas for a hug, given he was the one who took the fall again and was upset again. Wentz said it wouldn't take 2 years for them to be together, so Wes pushed him away, super kicked the shit out of Trey Miguel, and then low-blowed Wentz in a full heel turn. He screamed that Wentz left him alone and continued beating on him. He threw Miguel fully through the barricade and then drilled Wentz into the steel steps with a Meteora that he perfectly missed, because otherwise, obviously, his head would have been crushed. The match was excellent itself. The booking decision was understandable but disappointing, just given every title was defended across 2 nights of Great American Bash. And spoiler alert here, none changed hands, but the shocking heel turn at the end made sense of the booking decision, of course. It just would have been super interesting to see an NXT title regularly defended across 2 separate promotions. 4 stars, A- for the match. While it was a blast, it did not get enough time to live up to its true potential at 11 minutes. That really was a paradigm for the entire show. Like, fun stuff, but just things that did not live up to expectation. As was the case with Braun Breaker, Roxanne Perez, and Fallon Henley, though with Fallon, it was the wrong decision, and we called that from the start. At some point, if you're staying in NXT for an extended period of time, the heel turn makes sense to develop depth of character and range ahead of an eventual move to the main roster. Wes had grown stale as a babyface. He was already more interesting in the 2 minutes he turned heel than he had been since he returned to TV with his injury. So it was definitely a step in the right direction. And what I'm really curious to find out, and I don't know if we will necessarily, but Wes has been acting like a spoiled brat for months now. I mean, the better part of a year, whenever he wasn't champion. And I'm starting to wonder, was this long-term booking? Was he supposed to perhaps be the person who attacked Trick Williams? But because he got hurt and they couldn't utilize that angle, they did someone else. Has it at least been that mindset since he came back to kind of go back into that storyline and into that character? I kind of think it was, but until we can find out for sure, we can only speculate. Let's move to the Women's North American Championship. Kalani Jordan defending against Tatum Paxley. Tatum played mind games early and Lonnie caught her with a slingshot tornado outside. Paxley crawled under the ring with a doll of Jordan waiting for her as Tatum took out a leg. That gave out as she tried a handspring off the ropes, but Lonnie came back with a flatliner. Tatum avoided one of a kind, hit a 450 for a false finish. Lonnie escaped Paxley's finisher and caught her with an avalanche Spanish fly and a one-legged frog splash to retain the title in 10 minutes. This was not as smooth as I would have expected between these two. But Lonnie sold the leg quite well. The crowd was hyped for a possible Tatum title win, and having Lonnie come back on one leg to beat her without even hitting her own finisher, that was somewhat frustrating. Just given her title reign to this point has already been underwhelming, but they both worked hard. Paxley got to flash. That was nice for a change because of how rarely we get to see her wrestle. And I'd say overall it was a success. After the bell, Wendy Chu handed Tatum the doll of Lonnie, only to surprise her with basically a rear naked choke off the steel steps onto the floor. By the time Lonnie walked around to potentially save her, Tatum was already knocked out cold. Interesting that Chu would turn on Paxley so quickly. I could definitely see them having a freak off in short order, but it's August, and I kind of feel like if you were going to run that angle, you would just save it for Halloween Havoc. So a little bit strange to do it here. Joe Hendry fought Joe Coffey. Hendry just flung himself over the ropes to take out Gallus at the end of his entrance. He also did the Samoa Joe walkaway spot, though maybe he does that regularly. I'm just not familiar with his game. Gallus later pulled Hendry outside, but he immediately got up on them and then feigned an attack into the announce table Eddie Guerrero style to kind of rouse the referee and lead to a double ejection. Fans started singing Don't Stop Believing and We Believe to We Will Rock You as Hendry hit a fallaway slam and a falling choke slam to beat Coffey. The timing of the crowd with the finish of the match was superb, and Hendry was super entertaining here beyond the gimmick aspect. Feels like he could use a better and more fitting finisher, but everything here was a blast just to watch. And just as integral to the match was Booker T putting Hendry over on commentary, saying he made him believe. After the bell, Hendry said he likes it in NXT and is going to stay for the foreseeable future. Now, given TNA holds, I believe, monthly tapings, and Hendry is actually training right now at the WWE Performance Center, that obviously makes a lot of sense, and it's completely feasible within his schedule. But it's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out with Hendry, because he's massively over, but not contracted to WWE, despite whatever was worked out between the two parties. At least that's the belief. And you do need to assume by January, this guy is probably going to get a spot in the Royal Rumble. So it's going to be curious to see this relationship develop and his role in particular develop over the next few months. Javon Evans got the second half of his promo package, saying he skipped college because wrestling was always the goal. He said Matt Bloom, Lord Tensai, was the first wrestler he ever met, so it's crazy that he's coaching him 10 years later. Then he said he's excited to grow up in front of us, the fans. Personality plus from this kid. You just can't help but smile when he's on, and he makes you want to root for him every time he's on screen. I really cannot remember a wrestler like him. I mean, you could say like a Johnny Gargano maybe, and there is something to that, but he wasn't as bright and shining like Javon was. This kid is really special, and it's going to be interesting to watch him develop, not just in terms of as a wrestler, but as a person, because he's 20 years old. It's absolutely wild. NQCC was chatting backstage with Charlie Dempsey bothered Miles Bourne was getting thrown around by a woman. Ren Sinclair didn't believe Tavian Heights was actually in Japan, thinking it was just another term for sleeping with the fishes. She said she'd take out Kendall Gray to get even for Bourne, with hopes of getting in the crew if she wins. Dempsey still refused. D'Angelo family later came up getting Sinclair's back, promising Dempsey a Heritage Cup match if she wins and joins the catch crew. He ultimately relented to those terms. So we got Sinclair against Gray. Everyone was ringside. Ren impressed with a series of nice moves, including a surfboard stretch. They exchanged pinning combinations with Sinclair eventually punching Gray in the face and hitting a version of the Rose Plant for the win. Bourne was thrilled. Dempsey was accepting, and they all did the hand gesture. Ren is a total blast. Storyline, way more entertaining than I ever thought it could be. Before the main event, Obafemi in the parking lot said he had a productive meeting with Ava and will be defending the title next week against anyone brave enough to challenge him. Tony D'Angelo straight up interrupted him walking in front, saying he would beat Dempsey and there was nothing he could do about it. Oba gave Tony like a death stare, dude. You would never want to get that kind of stare from Femi. Chase U was in a new classroom that Andre Chase gave Ridge Holland credit for acquiring somehow. Everyone was happy except Thea Hell and Duke Hudson, who were depressed from losing title opportunities last week. Riley Osborne tried to pump them up. Then Holland walked in and gave a pep talk about bringing gold back to Chase U. He announced he pulled some strings, his last favor with Ava, and got Chase U a tag team title match next week against the winners from this week, so Fraxium. Hudson was excited, but Holland said he wanted to prove himself a winner, so it would be he and Chase vying for the titles, not Hudson. Then everyone but Duke and Riley, of course, were excited, so they're back to Doubting Ridge. Interesting to kind of see the circle all the way around. Don't think it's building to the end of Chase U, but it is curious how long of a shelf life WWE believes this has and whether it can ever reach the main roster. I think it could. It's corny enough and likable enough, but they also haven't gone and they've been there for a while. It's the perfect type of gimmick for the CW, so it's probably just going to be Ridge eventually getting excommunicated, I would assume, and then feuding with them. I guess if I was just speculating on the entire deal. Hank and Tank were throwing an indoor barbecue when Lexus King took over DJing. He played heavy metal, given Eddie Thorpe's hands were injured. Thorpe showed up, but they wouldn't allow the guys to fight. Then Stone and Stevie Turner got into it over a wing-eating contest. Ava walked in, side-eyeing them, looking disgusted as they stuffed their faces. Brindley Reese later asked Jada Parker who Dion Lennox was. When Ashanti the Adonis came up trying to flirt with them instead, Parker said she's next in line for the women's title, with Lola Vice and Sol Ruca coming up, as Lola said she was the closest. The dude from the Next Gen show then came in, calling them all smoke shows, so the women faces, did a triple powerbomb of him through a table. Even later, Shawn Spears came across Books Jensen, grabbing a cup of punch, perhaps spiked. Jensen was angry that Spears was giving him grief, saying he didn't control his career, but Spears just wanted him to have an open mind. Stone and Turner then overheard a bunch of girls talking about the women's division being so deep. Roxanne Perez walked by making a snide comment, so Stone got the idea to do a match involving all of the women who haven't had a title chance yet, except Turner punched him in the face so she could steal the idea and bring it to Ava. And then the Good Brothers came up to rain on everyone's parade, and that led to a party-ending brawl. NXT always does a ton of backstage story and world building, so it was unique to kind of weave them all in and out of one another inside this party. It seems obvious that Parker is going to get the title opportunity, given she shaded Roxy last week and was the centerpiece of this segment. But really, she should be going after the North American title, just given experience level on the roster. Hopefully, they stick to the booking of this match, and they only include women who have not gotten chances yet. I know Lola was involved, but she just lost. I don't want her in a situation where she gets another number one contendership opportunity. That to me would not really make much sense. All in all, I would say this paled in comparison to night one of the Great American Bash last week. It's funny how that works in NXT when you get a female heavy show that completely delivers, and then the male heavy show doesn't necessarily live up to expectation. Roxy Thea was still the match of the overall event, even with the tag team showing out in the main event this week. There's like 3 championships back on the line next week, so that's something like 9 title matches in 3 weeks. Maybe that will just be setting the stage for No Mercy, because that build does need to get moving. It's just 3 weeks away at that juncture, but it is a lot of title matches on TV in a short period of time, especially if you don't change any of the titles. Maybe Chase U wins gold. I could potentially see that. No idea who Obafemi is fighting. If it's someone legit from the main roster, then perhaps that could happen. But as of right now, we just don't know. Something I'm starting to firmly believe, though, coming out of the last 2 weeks, is that NXT actually needs to be a third brand. I mean, it is one, but I'm talking about from an experience factor. Not quite what Black and Gold was in its final days, but also not exactly what NXT is today. At some point, there is going to be a bottleneck with talent, where there's going to be more talent ready to get brought up to the main roster than there will be talent that should not be retained, whether that's experienced talent or whether that's talent in the PC. And in order for WWE to actually utilize all of these people and not go back to some of the errors that we saw when they overloaded their roster, let's say 10 years ago or so, they're going to need to utilize veteran talent in a more extensive way on NXT. But not only that, retain talent from the Performance Center and give them greater opportunities on this individual brand. So I know it's tough because you're like, oh, Trick Williams is so over. We want to get him up to the main roster. Thea Hale, she's doing such a great job. She should be on the main roster. Roxanne Perez. All this is true. But let me remind you, Thea is 20. Javon Evans could be there for 4 more years and be 24. And sure, it would be great to get him on Raw or SmackDown. He's super entertaining. But then what? This is a guy who you would expect, once he gets called up, is probably going to have a 16-year career, maybe longer, right? He's incredibly talented. So if you bring him up right away, then there's only so far you can go with him in those first few years. So that's why I do believe NXT actually needs to be developed as a third brand, a hybrid of Performance Center and main roster, however they can do that. And then maybe utilize NXT Level Up as the true developmental show and put that exclusively on Peacock or Netflix or something like that. I don't know that they're going to do that. I'm just thinking through what's happening and the way the roster looks. And I believe that will need to happen sooner than later. So with that, let's move over to AEW. Of course, we will be breaking down all 5 hours, Dynamite, Collision, and Rampage, taking our normal look at the storyline relevance of the matches on AEW TV. 5 of 17 this week fit that bill. That's 29 point something percent, rounded up to 30%. So nearly double from a week ago, which is certainly a positive. Still nowhere near that. I mean, really, what we truly want is like a 66% threshold, but even getting above 50% would be great. And just nowhere near that. It seemed like we might possibly reach it because Collision, for a change, had some storyline relevant matches. And then Dynamite came around and some things just kind of got thrown on television. I will also say, kind of off the top, we praised those 3 straight weeks of banger Dynamites, every week before last week, I guess, or the 3 weeks, I should say, prior to last week. This week was way similar to last week, maybe a little bit worse. Just, a dud episode of Dynamite. Not saying that there was nothing positive on it. There was, and we're actually going to talk about some of those things off the top. But from start to finish, was it a valuable watch? I wouldn't say it was compared to those 3 weeks that just went back to back to back not that long ago. So let's go ahead, break everything down. On Rampage, Wheeler Yuta beat the Butcher in 11 minutes with Bryan Danielson on commentary. He bit his neck and then won with Bryan's cattle mutilation. The only reason this happened is because we saw on Collision that they're training together. There was a narrated montage to that, and then some other reasons that we learned on Dynamite. Hangman Page on Dynamite cut an angry promo backstage saying justice delayed is justice denied when it comes to Swerve Strickland. And even though he's lost recently, that's been his focus. So I guess those L's don't matter that much to him. It lasted like 20 seconds. Jim Ross then interviewed Swerve Strickland, and all love to JR. But the dude was really struggling here. Swerve said main eventing All In is meaningful, and he didn't have any remorse for the dastardly things he did because it got him ahead. They agreed the match is going to be violent, with JR saying it will be Swerve's toughest match. Swerve posited that Bryan's body will give out on him, and then he promised he would win. The Hangman promo was whatever. The Swerve interview was great, even though JR struggled. Real questions, multiple questions, edited a bit, but still mostly full answers from Swerve. It was actually the best segment across 5 hours of AEW television this week. And yeah, there were good matches, sure. But in terms of a segment, this thing was a home run. On Dynamite, Danielson fought Jeff Jarrett. The rest of Double J's crew talked shit to Hangman Page on Collision before Jarrett cut them off, upping the ante with an anything goes match so Bryan could prepare for the danger that Swerve offers. Then commentary announced Ricky Steamboat would watch this match for whatever reason. And he wound up on commentary. Jarrett, who has become a babyface, you will remember, attacked Danielson with a guitar shot during his entrance. They fought into the concourse where Bryan took a suplex into one of those mesh metal trash cans. Then Jarrett took the same. Back in the ring, Danielson hit Jarrett with a chair and then did a spider superplex, but he missed the chair. Double J locked in the figure 4 as Bryan sold a knee throughout. Steamboat on commentary called the figure 4 a shoot hold twice. So he basically informed the audience that everything else we were watching was a work except for that one hold. I could not believe my ears when he said that. Bryan broke the hold with a chair, then ate the stroke onto the chair for a false finish. So Jarrett put in the sharpshooter. Bryan ran him into a steel chair in the corner, then hit Bazaiku knee with another to get the victory. Steamboat then checked them in the post-match, and Jarrett got busted hard way on the chair with some of the shots late. They shook hands and hugged. Swerve came out saying Jarrett, Steamboat, and Swerve were all legends who wrestled on TBS, while Bryan is not, since he did not hold the title. I suppose he was not aware. Steamboat only held the NWA title for like 3 months in 1989, and I don't believe he ever appeared as champion on TBS. But I digress. Swerve said he wanted to be tested also and challenged Yuta for next week, so that way he could show he's the most dangerous man in AEW, because beating up on Wheeler Yuta proves that you're dangerous. Strong close from Swerve, though. A great way to end Dynamite other than Yuta walking in front of the camera for a second, which just, he didn't know where he was. The match was way better than I expected. Jarrett did his job and did it well. He really has been doing strong work, especially given he's 57. Super impressive on his part. Zero issues with the booking. Going to the concourse and through the crowd, that got a lot more time out of the match than would have been achievable if they just went bell to bell in the ring. It also gave a greater opportunity for Jarrett to be realistically competitive. Needed the Swerve promo to end the show instead of the match, and it was just long enough to be worthwhile. I'm at 3.75 stars, B+ for the match. Actually, you could argue it was the match of the week in AEW. It was also another example of AEW delivering with its main event program while others struggle around it, as I will explain coming up here. On Rampage, Brian Cage beat a jobber in 1 minute. There was no reason for the match. On Collision, Kyle Fletcher fought Cage. Don Callis interrupted a Fletcher promo on Rampage, saying their nose shouldn't be in MJF's business. Cage also interrupted the promo, bragging about his squash, angry he wasn't getting attention for it. That led to the match. It ended in 6 minutes. Fletcher hit a tombstone pile driver. Then he challenged MJF to put the title on the line. MJF appeared on the screen in an obviously taped promo with a terrible echo, saying he doesn't deserve it, but he'll give him an eliminator match instead. An eliminator match is the exact same thing as a non-title match against a champion. At least MJF's promo was different. It was better than what he had been doing since returning. On Dynamite, we got MJF and Fletcher in an eliminator match. MJF had an all-American entrance with colored gear and the flag dropping down again. Fletcher prevented the kangaroo kick and hit a tope suicida plus a moonsault outside. MJF then sat in a chair by the barricade, catching Fletcher with a drop toe hold as Callis praised his intelligence on commentary. He took a hat off some fan's head for no reason whatsoever, then threw himself over the barricade only for Fletcher to cannonball him before hitting a flying elbow drop inside. MJF hit an Alabama slam and a hammerlock DDT, then slapped him and called him a wannabe Osprey. With Fletcher no-sold the Canadian Destroyer and did snake eyes into the middle turnbuckle. MJF then bit or kissed Fletcher, I'm really not sure which, to escape a move on the ropes and ate a tombstone piledriver for a false finish. That led Callis ringside to throw in a screwdriver. Fletcher, a heel, chose not to use it, immediately eating a low blow behind the referee's back. MJF then hit a kangaroo kick and the brainbuster to win in 18 minutes. After the bell, Will Ospreay ran from the backstage area. Before MJF did anything heelish, he didn't stand over Fletcher, nothing. Ospreay just took off. MJF knocked out the referee with his title for no reason whatsoever. Then he punched Fletcher with the Dynamite Diamond Ring, despite having the title in his hand. He could have just used that, decided to do the Diamond Ring instead. He bladed, of course, so MJF punched him more. Then he wanted to do the Tiger Driver. Ospreay finally got into the ring and chased MJF away. He hugged Fletcher really tight in his white shirt. That way they could get blood all over it for the visual. Fletcher was knocked out from being punched with a little ring, and then Callis argued with Ospreay. Yeah. Look, real good wrestling match with an immensely repetitive finish. Not just Callis throwing in the screwdriver, but one of his heels in the family first considering, but then deciding not to use it. I mean, how many times have we seen this now? And why is half of the heel faction not heels who refuse to let him help them? Why are they with Callis if they're not bad guys? This doesn't make any sense. The post-match was nonsensical as described. The ref did nothing to MJF. I bet you he doesn't catch a fine or punishment or anything in kayfabe, despite a blatant attack on an official. And this ring being some devastating weapon, it continues to be massively absurd. 3.75 stars, B+ for the match. I thought it might be an A. And then we got the finish and everything that it included with it. I actually left this wondering, is Callis going to manage MJF? Because no one else is willing to be a bad guy, except for Trent, I guess. But MJF is, and Callis praised his intelligence. So just something to think about. On Collision, Toni Storm beat a jobber in 1 minute. Mariah May was on commentary. So before the match started, Storm attacked her and then splashed her off the stage. They brawled until getting separated. May then watched the match from the stage. On Dynamite, May beat Viva Vian in a couple minutes with Storm 0. After a short match that spanned a commercial, she received a gift ringside. It was a big poster board of Toni hugging her with a message written on the back, "Die, Mariah, die." Storm again attacked her in an all-black getup. She stole the shoe, but somehow Aubrey Edwards single-handedly prevented Storm, an active wrestler, from using it. There was also the third pull-apart brawl between them in as many shows. Repetitive from the standpoint that they literally lifted the rock chant for the message. And by the way, what is Toni's gimmick now? Is Timeless gone? Perhaps she should be reestablished as a character with some promos or vignettes. They spent so much time establishing the Timeless character. Why have they not established the new or altered personality that has transpired with Toni ever since the attack? She changed her look, and that was it. There's been really no, I'm not saying explanation because the change does make sense, but there's been no depth to it where the entire character build was deep. They really need to go back to that. And then backstage after the show, Hangman attacked Jarrett following his match. They got separated. As that happened, Tony and Mariah continued brawling into the picture. This is like an hour later. This was all posted on social media. It should have been the final segment on TV, just for chaos sake. The Hangman Jarrett stuff makes sense. The Tony Mariah constantly brawling stuff, it also makes sense, but it's super repetitive. This has to be a stipulation match now. But like I said, it's been the same thing for weeks. Now, maybe others will disagree, and I respect that if that's the case. But for me, this thing has cooled off and it has lost its steam. When you're doing the same thing over and over, it's like missionary position every single night.
It's the same thing over and over and over. It's like missionary position every single night. In the tribal chief, the head of the table, we're not interested in that. No,
I'm not interested in it anymore. Again, maybe that's just me. On Dynamite, Camille beat two jobbers in a handicap squash match. Better than last week because at least she looked dominant, beating two women. Mercedes Moné then cut a promo that literally got zero reaction. She was excited that the EVP suspended Britt Baker. She repeated this twice before saying Britt is not the best. She is. High quality material right there. Oh, and she kept saying DMD. She kept calling her DMD, trying to get the crowd to chant DMD, but they straight up refused to chant DMD. The promo was legitimately terrible. Mercedes needed a manager to speak for her, not a heavy to fight for her. Tony Schiavone then interrupted, informing that Christopher Daniels informed him that Tony Khan overruled the Elite and lifted the suspension. So then they showed a taped promo of Britt that was supposedly live via satellite. He must have meant lifting it next week, because she wasn't there. Baker said Mercedes will take her ball and go home when things don't go her way. Cool WWE reference. Britt said AEW is her home, not the flavor of the month like it is for Mercedes. By the way, this is the exact same promo she cut against Saraya. Baker's promo was still eons better, though. The entire segment was ridiculous and, again, convoluted with the authority aspect of it all. If Tony can just overrule decisions, then what has everything been about? What was the benefit, really, of Anarchy in the Arena or Blood and Guts? It is so fucking nonsensical. This, by the way, was what the women's division got on Dynamite. 2 matches, sure, but maybe a total of 10 minutes, if that, neither of them involving an actual AEW opponent. 0 actual feud or storyline development, nothing happening outside the title picture. Is AEW's women's division getting booked better than it used to be? Sure. Is it being booked well? In parts? Sometimes? Certainly not in totality. Now, the reason Baker wasn't in attendance and why you didn't see her last week either is because she was suspended by AEW for a backstage argument involving MJF and his girlfriend, Alicia Atout, who was recently hired back by AEW for reasons. I mean, they didn't need another person to do interviews and backstage work. You guys can put 2 and 2 together there. So I went into accurate detail about the Britt MJF incident on buymeacoffee.com/gettingover last Friday. So you can check it out there. But the long and short of it is that Britt made a snide comment about MJF. Alicia overheard her and tattled, and then MJF went off the rails about it. Certainly not the first time that there have been backstage issues with Britt, and I highly doubt it will be the last time either. The discipline committee suspended her for 2 weeks, which, okay, someone got a punishment. But the problem, and I'm not going to start a rant about it because I don't really have time today, but the problem is this is another long-term backstage issue that Tony decided to stick his head in the sand over. And of course, it reared its ugly head again, just as these unresolved issues tend to do. Ironic that it's so close to All In and All Out. And if I'm being honest, for a content reason, I kind of wish it just got pushed back a couple of weeks because this happening at All In or All Out would have been absolutely incredible and a 3-year trend. Of course, I can't get everything I want. On Dynamite, a Jack Perry vignette literally got interrupted by a Taco Bell commercial. He was watching footage of him and Darby Allin, then he smashed a bunch of TVs with a sledgehammer or something. It didn't necessarily make sense with his character or accomplish anything in terms of building the character or storyline. If anything, it accomplished getting people interested in Taco Bell. It was just something that happened. Darby later said he didn't light him on fire because he wanted the title shot first, and he'll leave him alone until All In just the same. Good promo from Darby. He's much better in taped segments than he is live with a mic. On Rampage, Brian Keith beat a jobber in 3 minutes with Diamond Dust. Katsuyori Shibata's phone then said they all want revenge on the Learning Tree, and he's 100% ready for their match. So on Dynamite, we got Shibata against the Bad Apple. Chris Jericho on commentary talked about the star rating for his Minoru Suzuki match, gimmick or not, pathetic. Keith dominated this match. I mean, he dominated Shibata, who put on the Iron Claw and did an armbar to win via submission. Jericho waited 10 seconds to do a belt shot in a post-match attack. That allowed Hook to eventually make his way from backstage. Jericho got out of dodge before even taking a move. In fact, all 3 guys fled. So Shibata is down. Hook is a relatively diminutive guy, even though he's a fighter. But Jericho, Big Bill, and Keith all run away from a singular dude. This is not John Cena. This is not Stone Cold Steve Austin or Cody Rhodes or even, hell, Jon Moxley. This is Hook. And all 3 guys ran away. I guess the question here is whether Samoa Joe returns first and they run the 6-man, or if it's Jericho Hook and the latter wins the FTW title back. I presume it's going to be the 6-man on TV and the title match at All In, which means this feud will have been dragged out through not 2, not 3, but 4 pay-per-views. My Lord.
I hate this. I hate this crap. Stop. Stop with the crap.
On Collision, the Patriarchy opened the show with Christian Cage reminding he was using the trio's titles as a platform back to the AEW title. He did a whole title versus belt rant, which I've always agreed with. And he also did a championship presentation, giving the physical titles to others. Christian praised Nick Wayne and actually did the same to Killswitch, even hugging him. But he gave his title to Shayna instead for giving birth to Nick. Killswitch then grabbed his shoulder, only for the House of Black to enter without the lights going out, which was odd. Then the lights did go out, and Buddy Matthews returned. The champions fled. Bang Bang Gang then appeared on the stage with Kip Sabian showing up in the crowd. He threw Nick over the barricade so he could get flattened by the House. Ultimately, the House and Gang stood off, so I assumed this is going to be a triple threat trios match at All In, right? Like by the time creative concludes, that makes the most sense. But this shit dragged. I'm glad Buddy is back. They've been pushing off this Killswitch turn for 2 years, like 3. It's still going to be a hot moment when it happens, but it feels like that's all it's going to be, you know? Like, they'll have a match with Killswitch, he'll win, and then what? On Dynamite, Christian with the Patriarchy backstage declared a number 1 contendership between the 2 other teams I just mentioned for a title shot at All In, with Christian as the special guest referee. It really feels like a triple threat would be much more interesting. Maybe we will wind up with that anyway. On Collision, Darby Allin, FTR, and Mark Briscoe beat Undisputed Kingdom and the Beast Mortos in a 19-minute main event. 6th straight week or so of the same match with a couple random different people added. FTR hit their superplex splash combo, Briscoe hit Froggy Bow, and Darby added a coffin drop. They needed all of that to pin Matt Taven. Fun match, a worthy TV main event. Dax, after the bell, cut a promo. I bet you can guess what he said. He loves professional wrestling, he loves AEW, and they, FTR, are the heart and soul of AEW. So the Acclaim interrupted, asking where FTR was during Blood and Guts, saying their bodies can't hold up and Cash Wheeler isn't good enough to be on TV without Dax. Facts. Acclaimed said they were homegrown and therefore the real heart and soul of AEW, so FTR cannot cut the line, especially since they've never beaten them. Then they did a shoving match, but Briscoe got between all of them, saying the Elite want us to all hate each other, but we're all AEW. So then fans chanted AEW and FTR extended hands, but the Acclaimed walked out. This was actually a solid segment from the standpoint of building tension between 2 teams that will clearly be part, again, I think, of a triple threat at All In. My question is, how many fucking hearts and souls and pillars are there in this company? You have the pillars and everyone in the ring here, and Swerve and Bryan and Jon Moxley and Orange Cassidy. I could keep going. One person is supposed to be the heart and soul. A group, maybe. Not everyone in the fucking company. And by the way, why does this always have to be the storyline? What even is being protected from the Elite anymore? They just lost Blood and Guts. The Young Bucks aren't even on television. Neither is Kazuchika Okada, for that matter, because God forbid he be on TV without the Young Bucks. They haven't controlled the shows or the booking in weeks. Tony's been back at the wheel with CD for months. CD says things and everyone believes Tony can just overrule them now. What exactly is the existential threat to this company that still exists? It doesn't make any sense.
I'm bored, brother.
On Dynamite, Orange Cassidy and friends fought Roderick Strong, Mortos, and Roosh. The scheduled bout was an exact rematch of last week, but due to legitimate travel issues, the rest of the conglomeration couldn't be there. So Orange backstage said he found some local guys who could help them, and it was FTR because they were in North Carolina. And they came out in matching jean jackets, though Dax pulled out the Bret Hart glasses because of course he fucking did. Mortos completely missed a corkscrew of some kind. Kingdom jumped the barricade to attack Dax. Orange hit a barrage of tornado DDTs, including a quintuple spin version that Mortos always does. Roosh kicked out of Beach Break at 1. Mortos did a tornado version of a tope suicida. Looked really cool, by the way. Then Orange dodged him as he did a crossbody over the barricade into Kingdom. Cassidy then hit basically 2 orange punches, and in between, FTR hit Shatter Machine for the win. It took a lot to beat him, no doubt, but beating Roosh here was kind of sad, though not at all surprising given the way he's been booked throughout his entire AEW career. There was a lot of quality action throughout. It made for entertaining TV, but it really all was for nothing. Acclaimed entered after the bell with Max Caster's mic not working. They weren't moving from the stage, but a dozen security came out to stop them anyway. Only then did FTR decide they wanted to fight. So they ran out of the ring to briefly brawl, but it was basically broken up when it started. I'm not going to repeat myself from a moment ago, but it was super convoluted. AEW announced a casino gauntlet match for a number 1 contendership at All In. Now, I have no problem with the match booking in a silo, but I want you to consider the circumstances here. By the time this match concludes, Danielson will be the number 1 contender, still awaiting the main event. And Darby will already be another number 1 contender who earned a title shot at Royal Rampage, and I believe is going to have that match at Grand Slam. So whoever wins this will literally be the 3rd number 1 contender, and then the second one coming out of the show. That is dog shit, nonsensical booking. Why not make one of these matches for a different number 1 contendership? Maybe the international title or the TNT title. Oh, wait, Darby's also the number 1 contender for that. Or the Continental title. Wait, Claudio Castagnoli is the number 1 contender for that, but at least that's happening this week before that match would take place. They have 3 men's mid-card titles on the show, and they can't figure out a way to get number 1 contenders for those and use Kazuchika Okada, but let's just keep piling up number 1 contenders for the main title. Beyond that, this is going to be a title shot anytime stipulation, so basically Money in the Bank. And I would bet a significant amount of money in this match is where Ricochet debuts. On Collision, Claudio Castagnoli beat Lee Moriarty and Tomohiro Ishii in a number 1 contendership for the Continental title. I mentioned it. This match came out of nowhere. What had Moriarty or Ishii accomplished to even be in this match? I mean, the champion is Okada, and you cannot build a real storyline for him in that title. It is ridiculous. On Collision, immediately after the 6-man segment with the patriarchy that we just talked about, was a backstage interview with the other trio's champions. They couldn't even separate them on the same broadcast. Dustin Rhodes put over the Von Erichs, and then Sammy Guevara came in, having apparently returned at an ROH taping. Sammy said he was stuck in a vortex for 5 years, and now he is focused on earning Dustin's trust by teaming with them as a foursome. So he got stuck in the vortex with one legend, and now he's trying to sit behind another legend. That doesn't really make sense. I'm glad he's getting another chance. I could not be any less interested in this. On Collision, Thunder Rosa beat Taya Valkyrie in 8 minutes. Look at that. A women's match with legitimate build between 2 contracted talents on the weekend. Amazing. Thunder pounced Johnny TV off the apron and caught Taya in a chokehold for the win. The crowd was hot for Rosa. That was really nice. She called out Deonna Purrazzo after the bell, and she decided she wanted a Texas bull rope match. Sounds like this will finally be Rosa getting a win. And this feud, I say finally ending, but I've actually been entertained by it. Hopefully it will be better than the Lumberjack match. On Collision, Hologram and Mystico beat the Premier Athletes in 10 minutes with a 450 from Hologram. So I think it's 3 matches, 0 storylines, and yeah. On Rampage, the MXM collection fought Private Party. This was the main event. MXM cut a promo about training in the dungeon and how they don't drink alcohol. Party also cut a promo where they said nothing. Neither of these was quality. MXM won with an assisted DDT or a brainbuster or something. On Collision, Layla Gray cut a promo backstage saying she is now the flight attendant for Top Flight. She had the hat and everything. MXM came in making fun of the colors she was wearing. They were wearing the exact same colors. This and the prior match were very independent wrestling, not good at all. And then on Rampage, Nyla Rose beat Harley Cameron in 9 minutes with the Beast Bomb. I'm just happy Nyla got used and that 2 signed talents were allowed to wrestle on TV. So we got that on Collision and Rampage, and then we did not get that on Dynamite. this was bad TV, even if I'm happy that Nyla was there and got the win. So that wraps up AEW this week. As we occasionally do at the end of the show, let's take a quick look at the ratings for the week. Obviously, with Collision moving up from 8 p.m. to 5 p.m., that way it could air before SummerSlam. It did a terrible number. I really just think when they go head-to-head with the WWE PLE, they should just leave it in the exact same spot. But I think it was like maybe 180,000 viewers, not even worth discussing. Rampage was extremely low as well, but that has been the case for a while, and both of those are still going up, obviously, against the Olympics. AEW Dynamite also going up against the Olympics, did 622,000 viewers in a 0.19, pretty much an identical rating to last week. But it's interesting because WWE for Raw, and we don't really talk about Raw and SmackDown ratings because there's no need to, but it did a great number on Sci-Fi against the Olympics Monday night. It pretty much did its normal rating from a couple weeks ago, which makes me think it might have cracked 2 million if it was not for being on Sci-Fi. This, again, despite going against the Olympics. So you're able to pull a rating, no question, if you put on a really good show, which WWE did with Raw. Clearly here with Dynamite, they're just not having people make their show the priority. And we mentioned, these are some of their lower ratings. Olympics is legit competition, but it's not great, especially given they're negotiating this TV contract. And don't get it twisted. I've said a million times, they're going to get a contract. It's going to be for more money. They will probably finally be revenue positive. That is hugely important. At the same time, if you haven't signed that document and you're coming down to the wire and your ratings keep dipping, then that's not necessarily a good thing for the negotiations, nor is it necessarily a good sign going forward. NXT, I do not have the exact rating in front of me, but if memory serves, it was somewhere around 38,000 viewers with a 0.15 demo. It was something like that. I remember it being up like 75,000 from night one of the Great American Bash. So that was a huge improvement. Again, still on Sci-Fi. And these ratings are nowhere near, of course, what it had been doing in June when it went on that immense hot streak. And even in July, I think it hit 656 at one point. So this is coming down, but it's also the end of the Sci-Fi run. They're going to be moving back to USA Network. So in theory, they should be back in the 6s, maybe even low 7s next week. But I don't think the show is strong enough for it to be anywhere near 7 next week. So look, we don't do a lot of ratings talk on here because generally it doesn't matter. But what is happening with AEW Dynamite and NXT is super interesting right now. So that's why we have decided to cover it of late. Folks, that wraps up this, again, for me, chaotic edition of the Getting Over Wrestling podcast. I hope you listened to our WWE SummerSlam instant analysis and our WWE episode from this week, both of which look like they might be among our top 10 most listened to episodes of all time. So if you missed those, make sure you lend them your ear holes. On the way out, allow the Silver King to remind you that the Getting Over Wrestling podcast
is all about Defy.
So head over to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave a 5-star rating on Apple. Take a little extra time. Leave a 5-star written review. If you do, we will read it live right here on the show. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube at Getting Overcast and follow us on Twitter at Getting Overcast for episode drops, news analysis, highlights, all of that good stuff. Please also remember,
I happen to love the number 5.
and I hope you do as well, because for $5 a month or $50 for the entire year, you can become an official Getting Overhead. Just visit buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Sign up, you get bonus audio, the fastest 5 minutes in professional wrestling, instant reactions to the major shows, and exclusive news posts on Friday. Again, that is buymeacoffee.com/gettingover. Thank you all so much for listening to this edition of the show. We will be back on Tuesday with our next WWE episode, but it is time for the Silver King to sign off and leave you with just 3 final words. Bye for now.